What if I told you that among the passengers on United Flight 553, there was someone whose presence would spark one of the biggest controversies in aviation history? What if this crash wasn't just an accident, but a disaster that some believe was meant to happen? On that fateful day, December 8, 1972, United Airlines Flight 553 carried 61 passengers and 6 crew members. They were everyday people, businessmen, travelers, families. But hidden among them was a name that would later send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. The flight was under the command of Captain Wendell Lewis Whitehouse, a seasoned pilot with years of experience in the skies. Assisting him was First Officer Walter Carl Cronin, a skilled co-pilot, and Second Officer Barry Eldon Elder, the flight engineer. The crew had flown countless times before, and there was no reason to suspect that anything unusual would happen that day. The cabin crew, flight attendants trained to handle emergencies, welcomed passengers on board with smiles, ensuring everyone was comfortable. For them, this was just another routine flight. But not every routine flight ends in a routine landing. Most of the passengers were flying for business or personal reasons. Some were returning home, some were traveling for work, and others were just passing through. They had no idea that they were about to become part of a tragic chapter in aviation history. But then, there was one passenger whose presence stood out. Dorothy Hunt, the wife of E. Howard Hunt, a key figure in the infamous Watergate Scandal. She was reportedly carrying $10,000 in cash, and rumors swirled that she was on a mission related to political corruption. When the plane crashed, conspiracy theories exploded. Was it just an accident, or was she a target? As the passengers settled into their seats, unaware of what lay ahead, the plane took off smoothly. For most, it was just another journey, but for some, it would be their last. What happened next would leave investigators shocked, confused, and searching for answers that some say were never truly found. What if I told you that one of the passengers on United Flight 553 was carrying a secret so explosive that some believe this crash wasn't an accident at all? Among the 61 passengers and 6 crew members on board, there were ordinary people, business travelers, families, and everyday commuters. But hidden among them was Dorothy Hunt, the wife of a man deeply entangled in one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history. And what she had with her that day would fuel endless speculation about whether this was truly just a tragic accident or something far more sinister. On December 8, 1972, United Airlines Flight 553 departed from Washington, D.C., bound for Chicago. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, was one of the most reliable planes of its time, and the airline was known for its safety. Passengers boarded, greeted by the warm smiles of flight attendants who had done this routine hundreds of times. But not every routine flight has a routine ending. The flight crew consisted of highly experienced professionals. Captain Wendell Lewis Whitehouse had thousands of hours of flying experience, making him a trusted veteran in the cockpit. First Officer Walter Carl Cronin was his co-pilot, a skilled aviator who had flown alongside some of the best. Second Officer Barry Eldon Elder, the flight engineer, was responsible for monitoring the aircraft's critical systems. They were confident, prepared, and ready for another ordinary trip. But in aviation, even the smallest mistake can turn deadly. As the passengers took their seats, some settled in with newspapers, while others stared out the windows, unaware that their fate was already sealed. Among them, Dorothy Hunt sat quietly. She wasn't just any passenger, she was married to E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA officer and one of the key operatives in the Watergate Scandal, a scandal that was shaking the very foundation of the U.S. government. It was rumored that she was carrying $10,000 in cash, money that some believed was linked to hush payments related to Watergate. The moment her name appeared on the passenger list after the crash, the theories started. Was this really just an accident, or was something more sinister at play? The engines roared to life as the plane taxied down the runway. The flight took off without issue, climbing steadily into the sky. It was supposed to be an hour-long journey, just a brief hop from Washington to Chicago. For many on board, it was just another flight. For some, it would be their last. What happened next would leave investigators baffled, families devastated, and conspiracy theorists asking questions that have never truly been answered. The engines roared as United Flight 553 lifted off the runway in Washington, D.C., beginning what should have been a routine trip to Chicago Midway Airport. The Boeing 737, a reliable workhorse of the skies, climbed smoothly, its passengers settling into their seats, unaware that their journey would end in disaster. Inside the cockpit, Captain Wendell Whitehouse, First Officer Walter Cronin, and Second Officer Barry Elder followed standard procedures. They had flown countless times before, and there was nothing unusual about this flight. The sky was clear, visibility was good, and air traffic was moving as expected. The crew checked their instruments, communicated with air traffic control, and monitored the aircraft's performance. Everything seemed normal. Back in the cabin, passengers settled into their routines. Some were reading newspapers, others quietly chatting, and a few had already closed their eyes expecting a short, uneventful flight. The flight attendants moved through the aisles offering drinks and snacks. The hum of the engines and the occasional chime from the overhead speaker filled the cabin. It was just another day in the air. Among the passengers, Dorothy Hunt sat with a quiet but noticeable presence. She had flown before. She wasn't nervous. But what she carried with her, a rumored $10,000 in cash, made her presence on this flight anything but ordinary. If the conspiracy theories were true, if she was on a mission related to Watergate, was she aware of the danger? Did she suspect that this flight might not make it to Chicago? As the plane continued toward its destination, the pilots checked in with air traffic control, adjusting their speed and altitude as required. They knew they'd be landing soon, and they were prepared for what should have been a routine descent into Midway Airport. But in aviation, even the smallest mistake can have catastrophic consequences. Somewhere in the sequence of routine tasks, adjusting speed, communicating with the control tower, monitoring fuel levels, something went wrong. It was small at first, almost undetectable, a minor miscalculation, a slight miscommunication, an oversight that should have been caught. It didn't seem dangerous at the time, but what was coming next would shock investigators, devastate families, and create a mystery that would never fully be explained. United Flight 553 was now approaching its final moments in the sky. United Flight 553 was nearing the final leg of its journey. The Boeing 737 had been cruising smoothly for most of the flight, and as it approached Chicago Midway Airport, everything seemed routine. The passengers, unaware of the storm brewing ahead, were preparing for landing. Some glanced out the windows, spotting the sprawling cityscape below, while others fastened their seatbelts in anticipation of touchdown. In the cockpit, Captain Wendell Whitehouse, First Officer Walter Cronin, and Second Officer Barry Elder were focused on their descent. Midway Airport was known for its shorter runways and busy air traffic, but they had landed here many times before. They followed standard procedures, reducing altitude, adjusting speed, and communicating with air traffic control. Then something changed. As Flight 553 descended to 6,000 feet, the air traffic controller at Midway instructed the pilots to slow down and maintain their altitude. Another aircraft, an Air National Guard F-86 Sabre jet, was ahead in the approach path. Flight 553 needed to wait. The pilots acknowledged the instruction and adjusted the controls. This is where the first small but crucial mistake may have occurred. During descent, pilots must carefully manage the aircraft's airspeed, altitude, and flap settings to ensure a smooth and stable landing. However, any slight miscalculation in these settings can create a dangerous situation, especially when the plane is close to the ground. The delay added stress to the crew, who had to readjust their landing approach. To slow down further, the pilots extended the wing flaps, which helped control speed and stability during descent. They also lowered the landing gear, preparing for final approach. But something wasn't quite right. As the plane dropped to 2,000 feet, the pilots received clearance to land. Captain Whitehouse and his crew adjusted their instruments, expecting a normal touchdown. But then, a sudden realization. The plane was losing speed too quickly. Airspeed is everything in landing. If a plane slows down too much, it can stall, meaning the engines no longer generate enough lift to keep the aircraft flying. Flight 553's speed dropped dangerously low, and the pilots didn't correct it in time. At 1,000 feet, the cockpit alarm sounded. Stall warning. In an instant, the crew realized they were in trouble. The aircraft was now too low and too slow, a deadly combination. The pilots desperately tried to recover, increasing power to the engines, but it was too late. Passengers felt it immediately, a terrifying sinking sensation as the plane lost lift. The city of Chicago was below, homes and buildings coming into view far too quickly. Flight 553 was no longer in control. The ground was rushing toward them. In the next few seconds, disaster would strike, and the entire nation would soon be asking, was this really just a tragic mistake? The warning alarm screamed through the cockpit. The words no pilot ever wants to hear, stall warning, flashed across the controls. United Flight 553 was now in serious trouble. Inside the cabin, passengers felt a sudden jolt, followed by an unsettling drop. The normal, steady descent had turned into a rapid, uncontrolled fall. Some clutched their armrests, their minds racing to process what was happening. Others, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, assumed it was just turbulence. But in the cockpit, panic was setting in. The Boeing 737 was now too slow and too low, a deadly combination that could lead to an aerodynamic stall. A stall doesn't mean the engines have failed. It means that the plane has lost the lift it needs to stay in the air. The pilots needed to act fast to regain control. Captain Whitehouse and First Officer Cronin reacted instantly. They pushed the throttles forward, commanding the engines to increase power, hoping to regain speed before it was too late. The nose of the plane pitched slightly upward, but the reaction was delayed. The engines needed a few crucial seconds to spool up, and at this dangerously low altitude, time was running out. The Boeing 737 was now falling at a terrifying rate, closing the gap between itself and the ground below. The pilots had one last chance to pull the aircraft out of danger, but a fatal miscalculation had already sealed their fate. As the engines roared to life, trying desperately to generate enough thrust to recover, the aircraft pitched violently forward. The stall had already progressed too far. Inside the cockpit, a final, desperate command. Go around! Go around! The call for an aborted landing, an attempt to pull up and circle back for another approach. But it was too late. At 12:15 p.m., just a mile away from Midway Airport, United Flight 553 smashed into a row of houses in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. The impact was devastating. The plane clipped the rooftops of homes, tearing through structures before finally coming to a fiery halt. The sound of the explosion shattered the silence, sending flames and thick black smoke billowing into the sky. Inside the wreckage, passengers and crew were trapped in a nightmare. The aircraft had been reduced to burning debris, and the once calm, ordinary flight had become a horrific disaster. And yet, in the middle of the destruction, a chilling thought would soon emerge. Was this truly just an accident, or was there something more sinister at play? At 12:15 p.m., just as United Flight 553 was supposed to touch down safely at Chicago Midway Airport, it instead plummeted into a quiet residential neighborhood. The aircraft, now completely out of control, tore through rooftops, trees, and power lines before slamming into the ground. The force of the impact was so great that the fuselage crumpled instantly, and within seconds, a massive explosion ripped through the wreckage, sending fire and thick black smoke billowing into the sky. People on the ground, going about their daily lives, were shocked into panic. Residents who had been inside their homes suddenly found their roofs collapsing as debris and fire engulfed their streets. Those outside watched in horror as the burning remains of a Boeing 737 lay in their neighborhood, bodies and wreckage scattered in every direction. Inside the plane, passengers were trapped in a scene of utter chaos. The violent crash had thrown people from their seats, luggage had been ripped from overhead bins, and a deafening silence filled the air, followed by screams. Some survivors, still dazed, fought to unbuckle their seatbelts, while others were too badly injured to move. The flight crew, including Captain Whitehouse and First Officer Cronin, did not survive. The impact had been too severe, leaving them with no chance to escape. In the cabin, flight attendants, trained for emergencies, tried to assist those who were still alive. But the real enemy now was fire. Within moments, the flames spread rapidly, fueled by the aircraft's fuel tanks that had burst on impact. Smoke filled the cabin, making it nearly impossible to see or breathe. Those who had survived the initial crash now had only seconds to escape before being overcome by smoke inhalation or the spreading fire. Meanwhile, outside, neighbors and first responders rushed to help. People from nearby homes ran toward the burning wreckage, risking their own lives to pull survivors from the twisted metal. Firefighters arrived within minutes, battling to control the raging flames and rescue as many people as possible. Miraculously, 18 people survived, including some passengers who were thrown from the wreckage before the fire consumed the aircraft. However, 43 others, including most of the crew, lost their lives. Among the dead was Dorothy Hunt, whose presence on the plane would spark one of the most controversial theories in aviation history. The immediate aftermath was chaotic and heartbreaking. Families waiting at Midway Airport for their loved ones were met not with greetings, but with news that no one ever wants to hear. The city of Chicago was left in shock, and aviation experts were already scrambling to figure out how a routine flight had turned into a deadly disaster. But as investigators arrived at the scene, one question loomed over everything. Was this truly an accident? Or was there something far more sinister behind the crash of United Flight 553? You said, the wreckage of United Flight 553 lay scattered across a Chicago neighborhood, burning, smoking, and surrounded by the cries of survivors and the stunned silence of onlookers. What had been a quiet residential street just moments ago was now a scene of devastation, with crushed houses, twisted metal, and the smell of jet fuel hanging in the air. Emergency response teams arrived within minutes, but the situation was already overwhelming. Firefighters rushed to put out the raging flames, while paramedics navigated through the wreckage, searching for any signs of life. Police officers struggled to control the chaos, as terrified residents and frantic family members of the passengers desperately searched for answers. For those trapped inside the plane, time was running out. The heat from the fire was growing unbearable. Thick smoke was filling every space, and oxygen was disappearing fast. Some screamed for help, while others tried to force their way out, breaking windows and crawling through jagged metal. Their clothes and skin burned from the intense heat. Outside, residents of the neighborhood became unexpected heroes. Some grabbed tools, trying to pry open parts of the plane to free survivors. Others risked their own lives, running into the burning wreckage to pull out those who could still move. A few people thrown from the plane on impact were stunned to find themselves alive, suffering from broken bones and burns but still breathing. One of the survivors, a woman covered in soot and blood, was pulled from the wreckage, gasping for air. As rescuers helped her to safety, she looked back at the burning aircraft and whispered, "There are more inside. Please help them." But for many, there was no help left to give. 43 people lost their lives, including Captain Whitehouse, First Officer Cronin, and Dorothy Hunt. The neighborhood, once full of families and laughter, was now a graveyard of destruction. Back at Midway Airport, the scene was just as heartbreaking. Families waiting for loved ones saw news reports flashing across the airport TVs. A plane had crashed. People ran to airport staff, demanding answers, desperate to know if their mothers, fathers, children, and friends were alive. But information was coming in slowly. For hours, there was no official list of survivors. As night fell over the crash site, the fire was finally extinguished, but the tragedy was far from over. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, arrived, ready to begin their grim task, figuring out what went wrong. And yet, before the black box was even recovered, whispers of conspiracy had already begun. Why was Dorothy Hunt on board? Why did the crash happen just days before key Watergate testimonies? And was this truly an accident or something much more sinister? As the flames at the crash site died down, the real work was just beginning. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, arrived at the scene, determined to piece together the final moments of United Flight 553. Every crash has a cause, and their job was to find out exactly what went wrong. But what they discovered would raise more questions than answers. The first priority was recovering the black box, the crucial flight data recorder that held the key to what happened in the cockpit. Rescuers searched through the mangled remains of the aircraft, finally retrieving the device, which was badly damaged but still intact. Meanwhile, investigators examined the wreckage pattern, the damage to the houses, and the condition of the engines, trying to determine whether the crash was purely mechanical failure, pilot error, or something far worse. Early reports pointed to a stall caused by the pilots slowing the plane too much during landing. The official theory was that a series of miscalculations, including poor speed management, delayed throttle increase, and possible confusion during the approach, led to the Boeing 737 losing lift just seconds before touchdown. This meant that, technically, it was an accident, a tragic mistake, but not everyone was convinced. As soon as the passenger manifest was released, one name stood out: Dorothy Hunt, wife of E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA officer and a key figure in the Watergate scandal. The timing of the crash raised suspicions. Dorothy was reportedly carrying $10,000 in cash, allegedly meant as hush money related to Watergate. The crash occurred just days before key Watergate figures were set to testify. Some survivors claimed to have seen unusual activity at the crash site: government officials arriving quickly, documents being taken away, and certain areas being restricted. Whispers of foul play started spreading. Some believed that Flight 553 wasn't just a tragic accident, but a planned disaster meant to silence Dorothy Hunt and anyone who might reveal damaging secrets. And then, something even stranger happened. Before the NTSB could even release its final report, FBI agents appeared at the crash site, confiscating documents and interviewing survivors. The speed and secrecy of their involvement only fueled conspiracy theories. Was the government hiding something? For many, the official report, which concluded that the crash was caused by pilot error, wasn't enough. Too many coincidences, too many unanswered questions. Had the pilots made a mistake? Or had someone made sure that this flight never landed safely? The truth was now buried under layers of bureaucracy, secrecy, and controversy. And for the families of the victims, real answers would never come. The crash of United Flight 553 was officially ruled an accident, caused by a series of pilot errors during the landing approach. The report stated that the aircraft stalled because of a miscalculation in speed and altitude, leading to the fatal impact just a mile from Midway Airport. But for many, this explanation never felt right. Too many strange coincidences surrounded the crash, and the presence of Dorothy Hunt, the wife of a key figure in the Watergate scandal, only deepened the suspicion that there was more to the story. Dorothy Hunt wasn't just any passenger. She was married to E. Howard Hunt, a former CIA officer and a key player in the Watergate affair, one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history. Reports surfaced that she was carrying $10,000 in cash, possibly intended as hush money for Watergate conspirators. Some sources even claimed the amount was as high as $100,000. But what happened to that money after the crash? No official record accounts for it. And if she had been traveling to expose crucial information, could it have been too dangerous for her to arrive in Chicago alive? Then there was the FBI's involvement. Agents arrived at the crash site shockingly fast, even before some of the first responders. Witnesses reported that they searched through the wreckage before NTSB investigators had access. Some survivors later recalled seeing certain documents removed by government officials, files that were never seen again. The unusual speed and secrecy of the FBI's actions led to a chilling question. Were they securing evidence or covering something up? The timing of the crash only added to the speculation. It happened just days before major Watergate testimonies were set to take place. Some believe that Dorothy Hunt had knowledge that could have implicated powerful figures in Washington, possibly even President Richard Nixon himself. If she had made it to Chicago and spoken publicly, could it have changed the course of American history? Others questioned whether the plane itself had been tampered with. The Boeing 737 was considered a highly reliable aircraft, and mechanical failures of this nature were rare. Some theorists wondered if its instrumentation had been altered, or if an undetectable modification had ensured that the stall happened at the worst possible moment. Pilots are trained to recover from stalls, but what if recovery had been made impossible? Even testimonies from survivors added to the mystery. Some recalled strange individuals at the airport, watching the boarding process. Others described pressure from authorities to remain silent about what they had seen or experienced. Was it paranoia, or was there a reason certain details needed to be buried? There was never any solid proof that United Flight 553 was sabotaged. but the coincidences were too unsettling to ignore. If this really was just an accident, it was one that happened at the most convenient time for some very powerful people. Had Dorothy Hunt lived, what would she have revealed? If Flight 553 had landed safely, could the Watergate scandal have unfolded differently? And the most chilling question of all, if this was an assassination disguised as an accident, how many others might have been orchestrated in the same way? Even decades later, the mystery of United Flight 553 remains unsolved. Whether it was truly a tragic mistake or something more sinister may never be fully uncovered. What do you think? Was this truly just an accident, or is there more to the story than what the official reports tell us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into history's most shocking and mysterious disasters, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the biggest tragedies hide the darkest secrets. United Flight 553 was supposed to be a routine trip from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. A short, uneventful flight like thousands of others that took off every day. Instead, it ended in tragedy, controversy, and questions that remain unanswered even after decades. In the official record, the cause of the crash was pilot error, a simple miscalculation that led to the plane losing speed and ultimately crashing into a residential area. But for those who lost loved ones, for the conspiracy theorists who pointed out the strange coincidences, and for the investigators who were left wondering how so many small mistakes lined up so perfectly, the crash of Flight 553 would never be just another aviation accident. The crash left lasting impacts on air travel safety. After the investigation, airlines and aviation authorities made several key changes. Better stall recovery training. Pilots began receiving enhanced training on how to recognize and recover from low-altitude stalls, preventing similar accidents in the future. Stronger landing approach procedures. Flight operations were revised to reduce confusion in approach and landing sequences. Improved air traffic control coordination. After Flight 553, air traffic controllers were given better tools to manage multiple aircraft approaching busy airports, minimizing the risk of miscommunications. But while aviation improved, the questions about this crash never truly disappeared. Dorothy Hunt's presence on board remains one of the biggest mysteries tied to the event. Was she simply a passenger in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was her death part of something bigger? The fact that FBI agents arrived so quickly and that certain documents were allegedly removed from the wreckage only deepened suspicions. Some believe this crash was a convenient accident, one that may have silenced someone who knew too much. We may never know the full truth about what happened that day. The official story tells us it was human error. The conspiracy theories tell us it was something more sinister. But one thing is certain, 43 lives were lost, and their families were left searching for answers that may never come. Do you believe United Flight 553 was truly just a tragic accident? Or is it possible that this was something more? An event that was never meant to be investigated too closely? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into history's most shocking and mysterious disasters.